Welcome, everyone. I'm Gretchen Hagenbuch, Student Assistance Coordinator in the Student Assistance Program Coordinator for Caron Treatment Centers. I am in charge of the Philadelphia region. I've been with Caron Treatment Centers for 3 years, and I've been working in prevention for over 20. We're really glad that you joined us today. Thank you for joining us on our 14th installment in our webinar series, A View from the Mountain, Caron's Perspective on Addiction Treatment in the Wake of COVID-19. This week, we continue our mini-series called Focusing on the Family Systems, How Caron Stays Connected to Families in Non-Traditional Ways. Today's topic focuses on shame reduction, boundaries, and tough conversations, how parenthood changes when a child is addicted. Given the nature of this presentation as more of an open discussion rather than a didactic lecture, we are not offering continuing education for this presentation. As a reminder, we will be conducting this session in a webinar format. All participant microphones will be muted. During the presentation, we encourage you to utilize the question and answer feature to ask any questions you may have. And depending on the volume of questions, if we can't get to your question before the end of the hour, we'll have someone from our team follow up with you directly. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, many parents have been isolated together with their children at home. Yikes. Many parents have allowed their children to bend the rules a little bit. I mean, maybe bedtime isn't strictly enforced, or they can stay on their devices longer than usual, or they have free reign of the kitchen to make snacks. But for some, this seclusion has amplified problematic behaviors that previously have gone under the radar. Some of these behaviors could indicate an underlying issue, such as substance use disorder. Today, I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Michael Otay. Michael is the Family Program Coordinator at Caron Treatment Centers and has been with Caron for over 30 years. Michael has empowered thousands of parents to make positive changes in their homes and improve their relationships with their children through Caron's Family Education Program. Welcome, Michael. We are hoping that after we conclude today, we'll have answered some of those tough questions we often hear from parents when faced with a child who may be at risk for substance use disorder. So we're going to start some questions. How has addiction in teens changed today versus 15 years ago? And what should parents know, Michael?
Well, quite simply, addiction itself, as far as teens are concerned, has not changed. Teenagers haven't changed, the times have changed. And what I mean when I say that is what's changed most dramatically is availability. And what's available to teens today and what was available to them 15 years ago has changed immensely. Now, when I say that, one of the things I mean is the things that are available to them are far more dangerous today than what was available to them in the past. Children now are finding prescription drugs in the medicine cabinet. So addiction is going to happen a whole lot faster if your first experimental use is with Xanax or Oxycontin, oxycodone. Addiction, the onset of addiction will happen a lot quicker than what would normally happen if, in fact, your first exposure to drugs and or alcohol is alcohol. So the idea that teens have changed is not as much teens, but availability. And as a result, the other thing that's available to them is also information. So as technology changes, information is more available to teenagers than it was in the past. And this information has created a false sense of security for a lot of teenagers. A lot of the research chemicals that are available over the counter create the illusion that they must be safe because I can buy them in the corner store. So they're not as dangerous as maybe my parents may be telling me. So their willingness to take risk has increased as a result of that availability. So again, it's not teenagers that have changed, but what's available to them out there has become far more dangerous than it ever has been before.
Thank you, Michael. My son has been spending a lot of time in his room playing video games. Is this an indication of a problem, and how can I get him to join in our family activities?
Well, that was one. It's not an indication of a problem that your child is preoccupied with video games. Like, you don't have to tell anybody I said so, but video games are probably a tad more interesting than you are. So, so it's not a problem that your child may be more involved in playing video games in their room than they are in spending time with the family. But I do want to share with you some things that you could do, especially in the light of COVID. One of the things parents want to do is, and you have to do this together, both parents sit down together and come up with a daily family plan. This is how we're going to do things. You want to give them allotted time for helping to maintain the house. Doesn't matter when and doesn't matter how much time. You do what works for you guys, but allow them to participate in doing the laundry, cleaning the house, organizing the refrigerator, doing the grocery shopping, and make it a family activity. This is what we're going to do at this time. You do that. You give them also an allotted amount of time to take care of their responsibilities and chores, cleaning their room, doing their laundry, getting their homework done. And last and definitely not least, you give them an allotted amount of time that they're allowed to do video games, and you want to have a family activity. And it doesn't matter what the family activity is. Again, it could be preparing dinner, it could be having dinner, it could be playing a board game, but you and your spouse or you and your partner will have to sit down together and figure out how we want to map this time out in the day. And at the point at which you guys have come to an agreement, you want to share this information with your children. Moving forward, this is how we're going to do things. So holding them accountable for their responsibilities, allowing to help you meet your responsibilities. This is how you address that issue. But simply spending that amount of time in their room playing video games does not indicate a problem, although it does speak to a problem that will arise moving forward because it eliminates a certain amount of intimacy that you want to share as a family.
Thank you, Michael. I have a patient who continuously feels like she's losing control with her kids, being out of school and not having usual summer activities available. What can I suggest to parents to maintain order in their home?
Well, again, this question is very similar to the first. So a lot of those activities that I talked about in that first question want to be instituted here. Parents also have to have a higher level of emotional patience with the reality that their children are not preoccupied with school and they are home. Now, when I say patience, it doesn't mean that I need to allow for children to do things that they should not be doing or accept them doing whatever they are doing in excess. I'm talking emotional patience. I want to allow myself not to become as frustrated. One, I think of the biggest problems that most parents struggle with is not allowing themselves to remember whenever I'm standing in front of my child that I'm talking to an adolescent. I'm not talking to an adult. And adults have an extraordinarily short attention span. Adolescents' attention span is almost non-existent. So I need to remember I'm talking to an adolescent, I'm not talking to an adult. Their level of frustration is much higher than yours. Their level of comprehension is much lower than yours. So when I talk about patience, I need to be patient emotionally myself and remembering who I'm talking to. But my first answer to that very first question could literally be interjected right into the second question. All of those things I talked about, if you do those things, it will address these issues.
Thanks, Mike. My child asked me if I ever used drugs or alcohol when I was growing up. How should I respond? This is the one question I'm going to answer because I love this question and I've had it asked a lot of times when I've done many presentations to parents. Firstly, it's natural that you'd want to lie if you had experience. If you've never used drugs, please shout that to the rooftops and explain why. Maybe you had an aunt or an uncle or someone who suffered from addiction and it scared you. Being scared of drugs is completely appropriate. If you used substances and you were lucky enough to walk away unscathed, that translated into your kid probably terrifies you. What if they're different? What if their experience? And what I generally say to parents is, have in your mind the person who you know, who you care about in your life, who is addicted, their example, whether it's someone at work, someone you went to high school with, someone you went to college with. They're the person that you don't want your kid's drug use to emulate. They're the reason that you don't want your child to use drugs, not yours. And you could even say to them, look, sweetie, if I knew that I could guarantee you would have the same experience with marijuana that I did. I tried it, I liked it for a little while, I got tired of it, I gave it up. I would be much more lenient about how I felt about your use. I'm worried that you won't be like me, that you'll be like Bill or Bob or Susie. That terrifies me, and we never know which one you'll be. So the answer is, because I'm the parent and I love you, is that it's out of the question. Your brain's still developing.
Yes, and that's a really, really, really appropriate way to approach it. I mean, obviously, there's nothing wrong with honesty. If, in fact, I share with my children that I use drugs, I also want to share with my children that I remember that using drugs at this stage of the game in my life was one of my greatest mistakes, and not one that I would obviously wish on my child. So I don't want to share my drug use in a glorified way. A lot of us as parents remember having a good time with our friends and concerts, and we share it as though, you know, it was a good thing. And I share this with parents every week, to be honest with you. There's no such thing as overreacting to your child's experimentation, in that who says that they're going to live through their experimentation? In spite of the fact that experimentation is not in itself abuse, you don't have to have the diagnosis of addict and or alcoholic for your experimentation to end up in a very dangerous situation. So really important that parents, again, as I stated a moment ago, remember that I'm the adult. My child's level of comprehension is not the same as mine. I am myself 60 years old. If you're talking about a 15-year-old, you can go down to 15 and have a conversation with a 15-year-old. What you want to remember, that it is impossible for a 15-year-old to come up to 60 and talk to me. 15 is as far as they go.
Thanks, Mike. What are some behaviors, oops, my son, whoa, what are some behaviors parents should look out for that indicate, Mike, that a child is using?
Actually, there's a whole list. First and foremost, the very first indication that a child is using is that the level of intimacy in your conversation and relationship drops dramatically. So I'm not talking about just drops, because the level of intimacy will drop as your child becomes a teenager, simply as a result of becoming a teenager. Because if you're a 15-year-old boy and you thought about kissing a girl, no longer, that's not a conversation I'm going to have with my mom. So I'm not telling you what I was doing when I was standing around the corner on that side of the building. But thinking about kissing a girl or actually kissing a girl does not indicate that I'm using drugs or alcohol, but there's a minor drop in the level of intimacy that I'm willing to share with you. A major drop in intimacy is that when you ask me questions, I become extraordinarily defensive and combative in my answer almost to stave you off to a point that you stop asking me questions. So that is a major indication, because my life at that point is starting to become a secret. And I want to share this with you guys. There's a difference between secrecy and privacy. Me not telling you that I was thinking about kissing that girl on the other side of the building when you saw me walking home from school today, and you said, Mike, you disappeared around the corner there for a second with Susan. What were you doing? Mom, I don't know why you always asking me questions. Me not telling you that is privacy. Me becoming combative and standoffish about the fact that you're asking these questions is actually me attempting to eliminate a certain level of intimacy in my life. Now, another one that would be a major indicator is unaccounted for time. I can't account for like where I was and what I was doing for large swaths of time throughout the day. And a changing of friends, meaning there's nothing extraordinary about adolescents changing friends. What's extraordinary is my new friends are a secret, just one word names. That's just John. You know, I can't tell you John's last name. I don't know John's parents. I don't know where John lives. I don't know what school John's okay. John's my friend. So changing of friends and my new friends are a secret, that is another indication. And obviously large and or small quantities of money that can't be accounted for. And so there's nothing wrong with large quantities of money if I can account for it. So I bought a bike, I bought this laptop, I bought this phone with that money. But quantities of money that can't be accounted for, I can't account for what you've done with this money. You know, those kinds of things. So standoffish behavior, lack of intimacy, unaccounted for time, large or small quantities of money that can't be accounted for, and I'm no longer willing to spend quality time with you. All of those things are small indicators that your children are on their way to dangerous drug abuse.
Thank you. I love the privacy versus secrecy. I wrote that down. You're so brilliant.
Excellent.
My 17-year-old daughter is on her phone all the time, and she's constantly coming and going. Last week, she came home after midnight, and obviously she had been drinking. Mike, what should that parent do?
Well, first and foremost, and I love these questions. The first part of that question, completely normal. If your 17-year-old daughter is not on the phone all the time, constantly talking, and then you've never used the phrase, I wish you would shut up, there's something wrong. No, the after 12, and I think she was drinking, that one is really simple. Guys, if you believe that your child is using drugs and alcohol, they're using drugs and alcohol. Immediately as a parent, I should get you assessed and follow whatever that assessment recommends. So I should take you in, I should have you assessed. We're going to go through a process, and parents want to know, quite simply, what's the best thing for me to do when I think I have this problem? Follow professional recommendations. What should I never do? Follow my heart. And the reason that I don't follow my heart is you can't afford to make these decisions based on your feelings. You have to make these decisions based on the facts. So I want to follow professional recommendation. I want to get my child assessed immediately. And you want to remember what you heard me say just a moment ago. There's no such thing as overreacting to your child's experimentation.
Thanks, Mike. What's the difference between substance use and substance abuse? How do I know when my child's actually become addicted?
Well, no one actually is going to know the minute, so we want to eliminate that. But I will share the difference between abuse and use and abuse. When a person begins to experiment with drugs and or alcohol, at some point in that process, consequences are going to show up. The first level of consequences that are going to show up are going to actually be very personal. So I may drink too much and I get sick, I get drunk, I don't feel well. So that's a consequence that nobody else is actually going to know that I have except for me. I may drink to the point where I'm actually throwing up. But again, depending on where I'm at and the situation that this happens, it's only happening to me. But at some point, the consequences that come from drug abuse start to spill beyond me. So I'm starting to have money problems. I'm starting to have problems and fights and conversations with my parents about this. I'm starting to have problems in school as a result of my drug use. And eventually, I'm starting to have legal problems. Guys, addiction really literally speaks to consequences. When your behavior is creating consequences for you that you no longer want to happen, and in spite of that, you continue to use, that is addiction. So the consequences that are happening to me that you don't like does not speak to addiction. What speaks to addiction? The consequences that I'm getting now that I don't like. And in spite of those consequences, I continue to use. As a parent, if you threaten me with putting me in rehab if my behavior doesn't change, I don't want to go to rehab. And in spite of the fact that I don't want to go to rehab, I continue to use. That's addiction.
That's great. Powerful. So true. You're so smart. How do we motivate our children to do schoolwork and participate in virtual activities? Give it to them, Mike.
Okay, really, actually, again, very, very, very simple. First and foremost, I got to take a look at myself and I got to wonder as a parent, have I flooded my child with rewards that they do not deserve? And most of us actually do this and we do it out of love. Some of us do it because of what I want to say is like a mild level of financial trauma that we may have experienced growing up as a child. So I'm going to give my kid everything I didn't have, because I remember feeling bad because I didn't have this or I couldn't get that. So sometimes it comes from that. So I want to start as a parent with a very self-reflective look at how I'm going to motivate my child. Me and my wife did a couple of different things and she was not happy initially about these things because my wife suffered from what you just heard me share about. I also suffered from what you just heard me share about. The only difference between me and my wife is I do this for a living. So I recognize that and I didn't allow it to have that effect on me. But what I want to share with you, early on, my kids would get money for their grades and or rewards. In fact, before they went into elementary school, the reward was simply, if you get 5 gold stars, then we go to Kids R Us and you can buy yourself a toy at Kids R Us. So they would work really hard to get their 5 gold stars because this was the hard part. And this is where parents are going to drop the ball. And I know that none of your children are still in elementary school, but you could apply this to almost anywhere. 4 gold stars, what do you get? Absolutely nothing. You need 5 gold stars to go to Kids R Us. So parents drop the ball in this area all the time, but you need to set some standards for them. If in fact you are able to do A, B, and C as far as your online work is concerned, then you get X. Now, A, B, and C needs to be very, very clear. So that is A to Z, everything you're supposed to do on there. If you do all of that stuff, you get this. If you do not do all that stuff, you get absolutely no reward. So it's important that parents do that in order to motivate their children. Now, this is the piece that's important. What do your children want? I want to upgrade on my phone. I want to upgrade on my laptop or my iPad. I want to upgrade as far as my bike is concerned or my electric scooter. You know those things that they're actually motivated to have. So you want to use those things as motivation. If in fact you want that, you need to give me these grades. If you give me these grades, you can have that, whatever that may be. But it's important that as your child, do not achieve the goal that you do not give me the reward, because you're preparing your child for real life. And in real life, you don't get the reward if you don't achieve the goal. You can't simply want a great job and not show up to do it.
Oh, I wish it was true.
Yes, I would be home now and not doing this.
Mike, isn't it like, wouldn't you say it's okay for parents who might think it's too late for them to restart when it comes to rules and changes in their home? Like, it's not too late to switch directions on how to motivate kids, even if they're teenagers.
Oh, absolutely not. I'm going to share a quote that I share with my families again every weekend, and everybody that has an access to a Sharpie and a sticky pad, write this down and stick it on your mirror. There is no such thing as the wrong time to do the right thing. It does not exist. So as soon as you figure out what the right thing is to do, that's when you should do it. So no parent wants to talk themselves out of instituting rules or changing approaches or how they do things because they never did before. In fact, we would still be living in caves if that was true. If everybody said to us, well, we've been living in these caves forever, I don't know why we should start building houses now.
No, nothing but caves for us.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
How can I get my child to trust me and disclose if they have a problem? Ooh, intimacy.
Yeah, if you've ever heard of Spengali, that would be one way. Now, to be perfectly honest with you guys, this is a lifelong process. This is not one of those where I'm going to give you an easy answer. And the reason that you don't get an easy answer for one like this is quite simple. And that is that trust on an intimate level, meaning my most sensitive and delicate feelings. So if I'm gonna be willing to expose and share them with you, what most of us as parents don't know is you trample intimate and delicate feelings on a regular basis, not intentionally, but we do it. So how do you get somebody to trust you? One, first and foremost, you have to allow them to be them. So I got to expose my most intimate feelings. And when I expose my intimate feelings, couple of different things. One, first and foremost, most important one, you have to validate my feelings. Now, you're not validating my feelings as fact. You're validating that I feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong. If I say to you, no one likes me, you should put your arm around me and say, you know what, Mike? That must really be tough to feel like that.
Mm.
And I'm going to answer you yes. You know what most of us do as parents? We argue with you. Even if no one likes you. I like you, and dad likes you, and the dog loves you. And the reality is you need to be able to validate my most intimate and sensitive feelings. And trust is as a result of consistent behavior over a consistent period of time. So at some point, I'm going to realize that that is who you are, and I will trust you enough to be able to share very, very, very difficult problems, feelings, and situations that are going on in my life. But if you are constantly overriding my feelings with your thoughts, chances are I'm going to be unwilling to share my most intimate feelings and thoughts with you. So this is a long process. Parents really need to sit down and think about. You need to use your words wisely when talking to your children. And you need to remember that your job is not to have the answer, but just empathize with the feeling, with the concern, or the question that your child has. Your role as mom or dad is support. So I'm just supporting what you're going through. I'm not trying to solve your problem. And we lose that level of intimacy when we approach our children with the attempts to solve every problem that they share with us, rather than simply empathize with them and walk with them through that. The most powerful question that you could possibly ever ask your child is, what are you
Mm,
do about that?
mm.
Instead of making them think, I'm gonna fix it.
You're gonna make me cry. I do my son's laundry and I found marijuana paraphernalia in one of his pockets. What are some other things I should look for in his room or personal belongings that would indicate he is using?
Okay, so we're gonna back the bicycle up just a tad here. First and foremost, you should not be doing your child's laundry. So I've already dropped the ball there if I'm in the laundry room with my kids' clothes. So, and now, don't get me wrong, I'm gonna answer or do the best I can to answer those other questions. But as a parent, part of the problem is, one of the reasons I'm smoking marijuana is I got so much free time because somebody else does my laundry. So really important that as a parent, and as you guys heard me say when I started, giving them responsibilities is enormous. So I shouldn't be doing that. Now, I found the marijuana in his pocket. I'm going to respond to this and or paraphernalia in his pocket the same way I talked about, I think that my daughter is drinking alcohol. We're going for the assessment. Now, what should I not be doing? This is, again, an area where most parents drop the ball. We literally launch an all-out investigation, and then we have a court session where we sit down and we ask them very pointed questions about, where'd you get this weed and who'd you get this weed from, or where'd you get these papers, or what are you doing with this pipe? None of which is relevant. What's relevant? My child's experimenting with drugs and alcohol. I need to get them assessed, and I'm going to follow professional recommendations. You are not a lawyer. You're not a district attorney. You're not a judge. You are not a jury. But it is quite obvious, if I got evidence of drug abuse, then my child is abusing drugs. I don't need a confession from my child. This is not the Spanish Inquisition. So we don't need a confession. We ain't gonna put them on the racks and make them say, Mom, you're right, I was doing it. And as parents, a lot of times we fall into this trap, like we need absolute proof before I can take action. And the reality is, if you think they're using drugs, they're using drugs. Because I'm gonna ask you a really fun question. When was the last time you were accused of being drunk? You know what's fun? Last time somebody thought you was drinking, you was drinking. There was no question. People don't walk around thinking that people that are not doing drugs are doing drugs. In fact, I can't remember the last time somebody asked me if I was drinking. But I say that to you guys in that if you think they're using, they're using. And you need to treat them like they're using. You get the assessment and you follow recommendations.
How do you feel about parents going through their kids' stuff, like the second part of the question?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you guys, as parents, the goal, and this is again one of those areas where we drop the ball, we don't realize it, we get off track and we're on a separate road. As a parent, you don't want to become a better detective. Your child needs to become someone that doesn't need a detective. That's where you should be putting your energy and effort in helping your child get to a spot where they no longer need a detective. And why would I say that? Guys, if it's your job to catch me, what's my job? Not get caught. Exactly. We both keep getting better at our jobs. So that's not going to solve the problem. And I say that as parents, you need to be very frank with your children. I need to be able to tell you I don't trust you. I need to be able to tell you why I don't trust you. And I need to be able to tell you what needs to happen in order for us to build this level of trust that your child would like to have in their life and that you would love to enjoy having with them. And then you guys need to go to work working on creating that level of trust instead of trying to create those other two scenarios where it's my job to catch you and it's your job not to get caught.
Excellent. Thank you. What is considered normal behaviors in teen teens versus acceptable behaviors? Should teen drug or alcohol use be regarded as a rite of passage by parents?
Well, first and foremost, you want to define those words. Normal. You know, the definition of normal is the expected response. So it's normal that teenagers would do something that's stupid, but it's not acceptable. And that is where it's different. So I can't make the mistake of defining normal as acceptable because normal really is the expected response. And why would you expect teenagers to experiment with drugs and alcohol? Well, in essence, parents, we're tyrants, even if we're really lovable, caring tyrants for the first part of their life. If you got a little baby crawling across the room and he's going to the left and you pick him up and move him over to the right, that's tyrannical behavior. And it might be a plus because he was crawling towards something dangerous. But why do I say that, guys? We have been in charge of their lives, their entire lives. They have been working towards freedom, both intellectual freedom and physical freedom. So that's when I say intellectual, freedom of thought and expression. They've been working towards that their entire life. And physical freedom, where you can't physically stop me from doing whatever it is I intend to do. So it's normal at the point that they become teenagers and they find that freedom that they engage in some dangerous, risky behavior. The difference is that does not make it acceptable. It's normal that they do that because it's their first time out the gate. So I may engage in some risky behavior. And as parents, I need to recognize that because it's normal that they do it, it doesn't make it acceptable. Sitting down, having a conversation with your children about drugs and alcohol, about the risk of using drugs and alcohol, but more importantly, about your family tradition, where you stand as a family, meaning what? I'm not trying to create morals for the world, but this is what we do, and this is what we don't do. This is what is acceptable for us in our family, and this is what is unacceptable for us in our family. Having that conversation with your children, setting some boundaries around drug and alcohol use, and also that means setting consequences around drug and alcohol use. And then you move forward from there.
Excellent. I do want to pause for a second and remind the participants that feel free, please write in a question if, as we're going along, something comes to your mind. Please don't hesitate to do that. Thank you very much. What tools does Caron use to empower parents to make healthy changes in their homes once a child has completed treatment?
Well, here at Caron, we actually have what is called the Family Education Weekend. Well, prior to COVID, it was a weekend. It's been reduced to a day now, where we invite the parents of any patient that has come to Caron to literally spend a weekend with us so that we could educate them on several different areas. One, and probably most important, would be addiction itself. What is addiction? What does it look like? We need to eliminate the myths of addiction, whether addicts and alcoholics are bad, immoral people, whether or not they're addicts and alcoholics as a result of having bad parents, bad neighborhood, none of which is true. Those are all myths surrounding addiction. But that level of education for people to understand addiction simply as a brain disease and being able to recognize the fact that it's not a moral failing for a person to be an addict and or an alcoholic. But then secondly, and equally as important, we educate them on recovery. So what is recovery itself? What's recovery look like, and why does a person have to engage in a process called recovery if in fact they're suffering from addiction? Now that is literally followed by changes that family members want to make, because we talk about the impact that living with an addict and or alcoholic has on your relationship, how it morphs that relationship into what would be considered enabling behavior versus loving, caring, supportive behavior, and how families make those changes. And we also point them in the direction of the support that they're going to need as family members moving forward to support the ongoing recovery of the addict and or alcoholic. So all of those are methods by which we help families to actually engage in a process of the entire family recovering, not just the addict and or alcoholic.
Thank you, Mike. I'm glad to see that some questions are coming in, and we'll make sure that we try to answer those at the end.
Excellent.
Oh, look at that! That was so amazing. Man, it was almost like it was meant to be. So I have a question here from Sam. Should we as parents solve all our children's problems, or should we allow them to feel the consequences of our choice?
Oh, you most definitely should allow them to feel the consequences of their choices. Now, as parents, and again, reminding you guys, hopefully if you were here from the start, remembering that you're the adult. So some of those things, depending on how serious they are, I may want to intervene to a certain extent. And I want to elaborate just a tad. If in fact my child has gotten themselves into some legal trouble, and without any assistance from us as parents, chances are my kid may go to jail. Now, if I could intervene and get you a lawyer, and the lawyer keeps you out of jail, but I don't want the lawyer to eliminate the consequences, but the lawyer keeps you out of jail, you end up on probation, you end up paying a fine. I need to insist that you follow every moment of that probation and that every penny of that fine is coming from your pocket. And I also need to make sure that any privileges that I may have afforded you prior to this have been eliminated until that period of time is passed. So you're going to have to use some judgment there when you use the word all of their consequences, because obviously children could get themselves into some pretty extreme trouble. But for the most part, the answer to that question would be yes. So for example, my son or daughter continued to use after multiple interventions and ultimately ended up in treatment, and their treatment stay is a month. And they would probably get out in time for the prom, but the facility is recommending more time for them in treatment. Should my child miss the prom? Most definitely. Those are consequences of my decision. So as a parent, I don't want to concede at that point and think, all right, you already did a month. I'm going to take you out because I promised to get you out in time enough to go to the prom. These are areas where we drop the ball. Now, if you're not talking drug and alcohol addiction, guys, if nothing that I did all year would warrant me going to the prom, I should not find myself sitting in the backseat of a limousine, because as a parent, what did you just teach me? Reward without effort. So I didn't put any effort in and I still got the reward, which is where that air of entitlement comes from young people today. So for the most part, you should allow them to feel the consequences. You can support them in ideas of solving their problem, but solving their problem is their responsibility.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask the question from Dana, because this is a great question. How does Caron recommend handling when a teenager has been in treatment and is sober, was using cocaine, and now has turned 21, and the child thinks that he can now handle alcohol? Suggestions for parents handling the rite of passage for their first legal alcohol drink, considering the child has already had an addiction.
Well, addiction doesn't recognize the number. So it doesn't matter if you're 14 or if you're 40, you're going to use like an addict, if in fact you have the disease of addiction. So it doesn't go away when a certain number arrives. Now, for parents, they have to be able to set boundaries for themselves. I need to be able to share with my 21-year-old that I, as your parent, recognize that you have this disease of addiction. And as a result of having gone through treatment, my thought process was that at this point, you recognize you have the disease of addiction. You will not be able to use manageably, but because you are 21, you are allowed to go out and take that risk. But you need to know you go out and take that risk without our support. Now, again, that reflects on that last question about the consequences. The consequences that will follow an addict or an alcoholic relapsing are usually immense. So a parent really has to ask themselves, am I prepared for everything that's coming down the pike if in fact you begin to use drugs and alcohol? Because when you use, you will use addictively. Addiction has absolutely nothing to do with how old a person is. If you're diagnosed with the disease of addiction at 14, you're still going to have it at 21, even if you haven't used since you were 14. If you pick up at 21, you're going to pick up as though you never stopped. And this will take off exactly the same as it was at that point that it was a problem in the past.
Thank you, Mike. Next question is from Christine. Is there research to show that anxiety and OCD, which is a form of anxiety, can actually lead to substances of abuse as a way to cope?
That research does exist, but there's research on both sides. And what I'd say to you guys is if your child is struggling with anxiety, OCD, or any other mental health diagnosis, they are 60% more likely to become addicts and or alcoholics in an attempt to deal with what it feels like to be them. Drugs and alcohol are never the solution to mental diagnosis, but when I say that to you, they do create a level of relief, and the relief is momentary, and it usually gets worse after the relief. But again, if you're talking about an addict, you're talking about an adolescent or a young adult, momentary relief is what they're actually seeking early on. And at some point, that relief actually becomes addiction. So they're 60% more likely to become addicted if they have another mental health diagnosis.
Thanks. This is from Tom. The mother of a 19-year-old knows her son needs treatment, but wants to know, how does the family get him to agree to go to treatment? What happens if your child refuses to go?
Well, when you start talking about an intervention, you're really talking some family soul searching. So everyone in the family needs to sit down, and it's you guys that need to agree on the action that you're willing to take to get your son into treatment and or to accept his expulsion from the home, that we will no longer support you here in this house as long as you continue to use drugs and or alcohol. But this is a larger decision because this is a family decision. The family needs to sit down. Rarely will you ever get an addict or alcoholic to agree that while I'm out partying, having a good time, and I'm going to go into treatment instead of hanging out with my friends and using drugs and alcohol. So as a parent, I don't even want to think of it along the lines. People that go into treatment usually go into treatment under two sets of scenarios. One, their life becomes so extraordinarily unbearable that they concede to the reality that I'm not going because I want to stop getting high. I just want the madness to stop. And so most people are not seeking recovery when they go in that frame of mind, but they're seeking relief. And that's the reason that the second or third week in treatment, you get the resistance and the pushback, because I wasn't looking for recovery. I was just looking for relief. And I've been relieved. So now you people need to leave me alone. But I say that to you because what's the other type? And the other type is under duress, meaning family and or legal system insist that you go into treatment as an ultimatum. Either you go into treatment or you're homeless, either you go into treatment or you're going to jail. But those are the two scenarios by which most people go into treatment. You will never find anybody walking into treatment with a big smile on their face and a suitcase in their hand thinking, you know what, today's the day I start my life over. That is not the way people walk into treatment. It would be nice, but that is not the way it happens. It happens one of those two ways I just shared with you. So families have to be really firm on where they stand and what they're willing to do to help that person get into treatment.
Thank you. This is from Adam. What should I do if I'm concerned about the drug use in my child's circle of friends?
Well, unfortunately, your child's friends are not your responsibility. It's a very, very, very risky area for parents to enter into. Depending on the relationship that you have with the parents of your children's friends, dictate how you're going to proceed. If you don't have a very intimate, close relationship with the parents of these friends, you're actually asking for trouble if you attempt to speak to parents of your children's friends to suggest that their children may have a problem. This is always a very touchy area. If you don't have that intimate relationship, I would not recommend having that conversation. Chances are they're going to blame your child, they're going to blame you, and it will not end well. Now, if that relationship is intimate enough, of course, you could broach that conversation with somebody that you have a close, intimate relationship with and be honest with because of the fact that you guys are friends. But as a parent, if you're concerned about your child's friends and their drug use, then your focus is in the wrong place. If my child is hanging out with children that are using drugs, my concern should be for my child first.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll have one last question here. So many of the people that are joining us today are actually clinicians, and they're also parents themselves. Mike, if they could take away only one point from today's presentation, what would you like that to be?
Well, I think the largest concern that we have in this country as far as parenting is concerned is that parents reevaluate the goal of parenting. And when I say reevaluate it, that it's not your job to make your children feel good, to make your children happy, to make your children pleased and content with the home or the lifestyle that you guys are living. The goal of parenting is to prepare your children to leave. So I should be asking myself as a parent, is that the job that I'm doing? Because if all I'm doing is advocating for my child's comfort, safety, and well-being, I'm not teaching my child how to advocate for their own comfort, safety, and well-being, because that actually comes through hard work, commitment, and dedication to a certain quality of life that each individual has to create for themselves. So if I'm creating that for my child's not learning how to create it for themselves. So the parent's job is to prepare your child to leave. And I got to ask myself, am I doing that job, or am I just making their life here at home comfortable? So if you walk away with that, it will cover a whole spectrum of other problems that you may be struggling with.
Michael, thank you so much for helping us through this and answering these questions and spending your valuable time with us. I could just climb into your pocket and spend the whole day with you. If you or a client would like some additional resources on parenting during the pandemic, please reach out to us. Caron is here to help. We offer regional parent and family support groups. These are unique groups that are not led by professional addiction counselors, but are actually facilitated by parents who have been there. And that's really important, and want to provide hope for those who are dealing with addiction in the family. Also, Caron's family education program is available to anyone, even if they do not have a patient in treatment at Caron. And these are so valuable. We also have some great learning opportunities through our digital learning platform, and we're very proud of these. One of our courses would be really beneficial to anyone on this webinar, called PrEP, Prevention Resources and Education for Parents and Caregivers. This course consists of 5 modules that will provide parents and caregivers with the skills, knowledge, and resources regarding substance use and prevention, and how they can influence the impact of their child's actions and decisions. join us next Tuesday for our next installment of Focusing on the Family Systems mini-series, and it's called When Alcohol Summer, COVID-19 and Teens Intersect. Also remember to reach out to your local regional resource director for any additional information that you might need or questions that you have. It has been a pleasure, and I thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.
Actually.